You dare return!
Who is that child?
Your heir, my king. I brought him back.
What happens when the most ruthless alpha in the Northwest discards his fated mate for being too weak? He signs his own downfall. 4 years later, the shattered Omega he banished into the snow returns. And she isn't alone. She's holding the hand of his only legitimate heir. In the secluded, mist-shrouded valleys of Snoqualmie Pass, Washington, the Obsidian Ridge Pack operated less like a traditional werewolf community and more like a ruthless corporate syndicate. At the head of the table sat Tobias Sebastian. Tobias wasn't just an alpha. He was an undisputed king in the supernatural underworld, using his front company, Sebastian Holdings, to buy out, dismantle, and absorb weaker packs across the Pacific Northwest. He was notoriously cold, fiercely pragmatic, and completely devoid of empathy. To Tobias, power was the only currency that mattered. Then came Anna. Anna Hughes was an Omega from the fractured Pine Creek Pack down in Oregon. When her father, an ambitious but foolish alpha, defaulted on a massive territorial debt to Sebastian Holdings, Anna was offered up as collateral. She wasn't a warrior. She wasn't a strategist. She was a quiet, gentle Omega whose only defense mechanism was to make herself as invisible as possible. When she was dropped at the steps of the sprawling Sebastian estate on a freezing November evening, she fully expected to be assigned to the kitchens or the laundry rooms. She did not expect the devastating, intoxicating scent of pine and crushed thunder to hit her the moment the heavy oak doors opened. Nor did she expect the towering, terrifying Alpha King to freeze in his tracks as he walked down the grand staircase, his piercing silver eyes locking onto hers. They were fated mates. The moon goddess, in her infinite, twisted wisdom, had paired the most ruthless predator in the region with the most fragile prey. For a fraction of a second, Anna felt a surge of impossible hope. But Tobias Sebastian did not build an empire by succumbing to sentiment. He stared at the trembling girl in her worn wool coat, calculating the optics. An Alpha King needed a queen who commanded respect, a Luna who could stand shoulder to shoulder with him in boardrooms and on battlefields. A weak, submissive Omega from a disgraced family would make him look vulnerable. It would invite challenges from rival packs. "Take her to the study," Tobias ordered his beta, Harrison, his voice devoid of any warmth. In the dark, mahogany-lined office, the execution of Anna's soul took less than 5 minutes. "I don't care what the fates dictated," Tobias said, standing by the window, refusing to even look at her. "I am marrying Vivienne Croft of the Crimson Claw Pack next month. It is a strategic alliance. You, Anna, are a liability I refuse to entertain." "But the bond," Anna whispered, clutching her chest where an agonizing, burning ache was already beginning to spread. "You feel it too. If you reject me, it will." "It will fade," Tobias interrupted coldly. He finally turned to her, his expression like carved granite. "I, Tobias Sebastian, Alpha of Obsidian Ridge, reject you, Anna Hughes, as my mate and my Luna. You will leave this territory tonight. If my patrols catch your scent within 100 miles of my borders by sunrise, you will be hunted as a rogue." The rejection tore through Anna like physical shrapnel. She collapsed to her knees, screaming in agony as the spiritual tether between them snapped, leaving behind a raw, bleeding void. Tobias flinched, a brief flash of pain crossing his own features, but he masked it instantly. He signaled Harrison, who dragged the sobbing, half-conscious Omega out into the freezing snow. Anna was given a duffel bag, $300, and a ride to the nearest Greyhound bus station. She rode in silence for 2 days, curled in the back of a bus heading east, shivering violently as her wolf cried out in despair. She settled in a dreary, forgotten human town called Missoula, Montana. She found a job washing dishes at a small diner, living in a cramped, drafty trailer on the edge of town. She thought she had hit rock bottom. She thought the worst was over. Until 3 weeks later, when the brutal morning sickness began, Anna sat on the edge of a stained linoleum bathtub, staring at the 2 pink lines on the plastic test. She wasn't just a rejected, broken Omega. She was carrying the heir to the Obsidian Ridge Empire. If Tobias found out, he would take the child and kill her. She swore to the moon goddess right then and there, Tobias Sebastian would never know his child existed. 4 years passed. Anna had meticulously rebuilt her life from the ashes of her rejection. She now managed a quiet botanical nursery on the outskirts of Missoula, keeping her head down and her scent masked with wolfsbane extract. Her entire universe revolved around Leo. Leo was a beautiful, terrifying child. He had his mother's soft, unruly brown hair, but everything else was a mirror image of the man who had discarded them. He had Tobias's piercing silver eyes, his defiant jawline, and, most dangerously, his overwhelming alpha aura. At barely 4 years old, Leo was already faster and stronger than a human teenager. When he threw tantrums, the air pressure in the room would drop, and the light bulbs would flicker. Anna lived in a constant state of anxiety, knowing she couldn't keep a pure-blood alpha hidden in a human town forever. Meanwhile, back in Washington, Tobias's empire was cracking from the inside out. His marriage to Vivian Croft had secured the borders, but it was a union built on ice and venom. Vivian was cruel, vain, and fiercely ambitious, but after 3 years of trying, she remained barren. The pack elders operating as the board of directors were growing restless. An alpha king without an heir was a king with an expiration date. Worse still was Tobias's own physical decline. Rejecting a fated mate wasn't just an emotional trauma, it was a spiritual severing that slowly poisoned the soul. Tobias suffered from chronic insomnia, violent migraines, and an increasingly volatile temper that terrified even his most loyal enforcers. He spent his nights pacing the estate, haunted by the phantom scent of rain and wildflowers Anna's scent. He would never admit it, not even to himself, but the ruthless king was decaying on his throne. The collision course between their two worlds was sparked by a terrifying reality of werewolf biology. One evening in mid-October, Leo collapsed in the nursery greenhouse. His small body was burning with a supernatural fever, his skin radiating heat like a furnace. His eyes were wide, glowing a frantic, uncontrollable gold. Anna recognized the symptoms immediately from old pack lore. It was the alpha's burn, a rare, potentially fatal transition fever that occurred when a highly dominant pup's wolf tried to manifest too early due to the lack of a mature alpha's guiding presence. Anna tried everything: ice baths, herbal poultices, suppressing chants. Nothing worked. As Leo's breathing grew ragged and his pulse dangerously fast, Anna realized she had a horrifying choice: let her son die in hiding, or risk everything to save him. She needed a specialized werewolf physician, and there was only one she vaguely trusted: Dr. Arthur Pendleton, a neutral healer who operated a discreet supernatural clinic out of an old warehouse district in Seattle. Anna packed Leo into her rusted Subaru and drove frantically through the night, praying the wolfsbane she had pumped into her own system would keep her scent off the grid. She arrived at Dr. Pendleton's clinic just as dawn was breaking. The elderly doctor took one look at the seizing, burning child and rushed them into a secured trauma room. "His core temperature is astronomical," Dr. Pendleton muttered, hooking Leo up to an IV of specialized sedatives. He paused, frowning as he wiped a cool cloth over Leo's face. The boy's eyes fluttered open, revealing those striking, unmistakable silver irises. Dr. Pendleton froze. He knew every major bloodline in the Pacific Northwest. He knew those eyes. "Anna." "Doctor," Pendleton said slowly, his voice laced with dread. "Who is the father?" "It doesn't matter," Anna lied, her voice shaking. "Just save him, Arthur. Please. It matters because this child's aura is pulling on the local ley lines. He is a pure-blood alpha of the highest order. I can stabilize him, but he needs his sire's blood to break the fever completely. If he doesn't get it by midnight, his own wolf will burn his nervous system out." Anna burst into tears, her hands trembling as she stroked Leo's sweat-soaked hair. He rejected me. He doesn't know about him. If I call him, he'll take my son away." Arthur looked at the monitors, which were beeping frantically. "Anna, if you don't call him, you won't have a son to be taken." Defeated, shattered, and utterly out of options, Anna gave Arthur the permission to make the call. 2 hours later, the heavy metal doors of the clinic's loading dock were ripped off their hinges. Tobias Sebastian did not knock. He stalked into the clinic, flanked by Harrison and 2 heavily armed enforcers, his aura so suffocatingly dark and furious that the medical equipment around him began to short-circuit. Dr. Pendleton had called his private line, claiming an emergency regarding Obsidian Ridge blood, but had refused to elaborate over the phone. Tobias stormed down the hallway, ready to execute whoever was playing games with his pack's name. But as he turned the corner toward the isolation ward, he stopped dead. The scent. It cut through the smell of antiseptic and bleach like a lightning strike, rain and wildflowers. It was a scent that had haunted his nightmares for 4 years. Tobias pushed past Dr. Pendleton, his breathing suddenly ragged, and shoved the door to room 4 open. There, sitting by a hospital bed, looking thinner and older but undeniably her, was Anna. She stood up instantly, placing herself defensively between Tobias and the bed. Her eyes, once soft and submissive, were now hardened with the fierce, desperate terror of a mother cornered. Tobias's chest heaved. "You," he breathed, the word sounding like it was ripped from his throat. The shock of seeing the mate he had discarded, the mate who was supposed to be long dead or forgotten, completely derailed his composure. Then, his gaze drifted past Anna's shoulder. Lying in the bed, pale and hooked to monitors, was a little boy. The child shifted restlessly, letting out a small, pained whine. As he turned his head, Tobias saw the boy's face. He saw his own jawline. He saw the unruly hair. And as the boy's eyes fluttered open in a fever haze, Tobias looked directly into a pair of unmistakable, glowing silver eyes. The monitors beeped steadily in the deafening silence of the room. Tobias felt the floor drop out from under him. The Ruthless Alpha King, a man who had orchestrated hostile takeovers and broken rival packs without blinking, staggered back a step, utterly paralyzed by the impossibility before him. "He's yours," Anna whispered, her voice laced with venom and tears. "And if you don't save him right now, I will kill you myself." The silence in the trauma room was deafening, broken only by the frantic, erratic beeping of Leo's heart monitor. Tobias Sebastian, the undisputed, iron-fisted ruler of the Pacific Northwest, stood entirely paralyzed. For a man who had orchestrated the hostile takeovers of dozens of packs and ruthlessly liquidated his enemies, the sight of the tiny, burning boy in the hospital bed dismantled him in seconds. "Take it," Tobias finally choked out, his voice a gravelly, commanding bark that left no room for argument. He didn't look at Anna. He couldn't. Instead, he tore off his custom Tom Ford suit jacket, tossing it haphazardly onto the sterile floor, and rolled up the sleeve of his crisp white dress shirt. "Take whatever you need. Now, Arthur." Dr. Pendleton didn't waste a second. He readied the thick gauge needle and the transfusion tubing. Anna backed away, her hands pressed over her mouth to stifle her sobs, her entire body trembling with the adrenaline of absolute terror. Tobias stepped up to the bedside, his massive frame dwarfing the small cot. He looked down at Leo's flushed, sweat-drenched face. The boy whimpered, a tiny, distressed sound that sent a violently sharp spike of agonizing protective instinct straight through Tobias's chest. His wolf, dormant and suffering for 4 years, clawed frantically at his ribs, howling a single deafening word. "Mine." Arthur inserted the needle into Tobias's arm. The thick, dark blood of the Alpha King began to flow through the tubes, glowing with a faint, almost imperceptible golden luminescence, the raw, physical manifestation of dominant lycanthropic power. As the blood entered Leo's small veins, the reaction was instantaneous. The boy's frantic gasping slowed. The agonizing heat radiating from his skin began to dissipate, replaced by a steady, healthy warmth. The glowing silver in Leo's eyes faded as his lids fluttered shut, sending him into a deep, healing sleep. Tobias stood frozen, watching the rise and fall of his son's chest. The monitor's tempo steadied into a rhythmic, peaceful hum. "He's stabilized," Arthur whispered, wiping his brow. "The fever has broken. The alpha blood anchored his wolf." Tobias slowly pulled the needle from his own arm, pressing a gauze pad to the puncture wound. He finally turned his gaze to Anna. She was pressed against the far wall, her arms wrapped defensively around herself. She looked so different from the fragile, submissive girl he had banished into the snow. The soft edges of her youth had been carved away by hardship, leaving behind a hardened, fiercely resilient woman. 4 years, Tobias said, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet whisper that vibrated with suppressed fury. You kept my son from me for 4 years. Anna's chin tipped up. The fear in her eyes was entirely eclipsed by a burning, unyielding hatred. I kept him alive for 4 years. You threw his mother into a blizzard with nothing but the clothes on her back. If you had known I was pregnant, you would have taken him and disposed of me. Don't you dare stand there and play the victim, Tobias. The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. Tobias stepped forward, his alpha aura flaring, heavy and suffocating, making the glass in the medical cabinets rattle. You are my pack. He is my heir. You belong at Obsidian Ridge. I have no pack, Anna spat back, refusing to submit to his aura. You severed that bond yourself. You rejected me. I am a rogue, and Leo is mine. The moment he is strong enough to walk, we are leaving. You are going nowhere, Tobias growled, closing the distance between them until he was mere inches from her face. The scent of rain and wildflowers washed over him, a cruel, intoxicating reminder of the colossal mistake he had made. You will pack your things. You and my son are returning to the estate with me tonight. If you try to run, I will have my security track you down, and you will never see him again. Do you understand me, Anna? It was a hollow threat, born of desperation, but Anna couldn't take that risk. She looked at her sleeping son, then back at the monster who had sired him. Fine, she whispered bitterly, but know this. You might have the power to drag us back to your prison, but you will never be his father. Within the hour, a convoy of heavily armored Mercedes Maybachs arrived at the clinic. Harrison, Tobias's beta, organized the extraction with the clinical precision of the former military operative he was. Anna and the sleeping Leo were secured in the back of the lead vehicle with Tobias. The drive eastward along Interstate 90 toward Snoqualmie Pass was suffocatingly tense. Tobias couldn't take his eyes off the boy. He watched the way Leo's nose scrunched when he breathed, a mirror image of Tobias's own sleeping habits. Every breath the boy took seemed to knit a fractured piece of Tobias's broken soul back together. But their arrival at the sprawling, fortress-like Sebastian estate was far from a homecoming. Standing in the grand foyer, flanked by a dozen heavily armed enforcers, was Vivian Croft. The Luna of Obsidian Ridge wore a silk emerald gown, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed, her features twisted into a mask of pure aristocratic venom. What is the meaning of this, Tobias? Vivian demanded, her sharp eyes darting from her husband to the woman standing behind him, clutching a sleeping child. When Vivian's gaze locked onto Leo's face, all the color drained from her cheeks. The boy was a carbon copy of the Alpha King. This is Anna Hughes, Tobias announced, his voice echoing off the marble floors. He stepped to the side, forcing the pack to look at the Omega he had once discarded. And this is Leo Sebastian, my son, the sole heir to the Obsidian Ridge pack. Gasps rippled through the gathered enforcers and household staff. Vivian staggered back a step, her manicured hands curling into tight fists. A legitimate heir born of a fated mate completely undermined her position. By werewolf law, Anna's bloodline claim superseded Vivian's arranged marriage. You bring a rogue whore and a bastard into our home? Vivian shrieked, losing her carefully crafted composure. After everything my pack has done for you? After the alliances we've built? A low, terrifying growl ripped from Tobias's throat. His eyes flashed a brilliant, violent silver, and the air pressure in the foyer plummeted. Speak of the mother of my heir with disrespect again, Vivian, and I will rip your tongue from your mouth. They will reside in the East Wing. Anyone who fails to treat Anna and Leo with the absolute reverence of royalty will answer to me personally. Vivian stared at Tobias, pure hatred burning in her eyes. She gave a stiff, jerky nod, turning on her heel and storming up the grand staircase. Anna stood holding Leo, feeling like she had just been shoved into a cage with a dozen starving wolves. She looked at Tobias, seeing the exhaustion and the fractured desperation behind his cold exterior. The true battle for her son's life hadn't ended at the clinic. It was only just beginning. The first 2 weeks at the Sebastian estate were a masterclass in suffocating tension. Anna fortified the East Wing suite like a military bunker, She rarely ventured out, opting to homeschool Leo behind locked doors, keeping a silver-laced hunting dagger strapped to her thigh at all times. Tobias's attempts to bridge the gap were met with impenetrable walls. Whenever he entered the room, hoping to offer Leo a toy or spark a simple conversation, the 4-year-old would step fiercely in front of his mother. The boy's chest would rumble with a pre-transition growl, his silver eyes flashing with the exact same dominant, arrogant spark that belonged to the Alpha King. It was a poetic, agonizing torture for Tobias. The ruler of the Northwest underworld, a man who commanded thousands, was completely neutralized by the glare of a toddler. Meanwhile, in the West Wing, Vivienne Croft was unraveling. The sudden existence of a pure-blood heir born of a fated mate rendered her entirely obsolete. She knew the pack elders were already holding secret meetings, whispering about voiding her marriage to secure the Sebastian bloodline. But Vivienne was far too ambitious to simply step aside and become a humiliated footnote in Obsidian Ridge's history. Using a burner phone and untraceable offshore accounts routed through the Cayman Islands, she contacted the supernatural criminal underground. She hired Donovan, a ruthless rogue alpha operating a heavily armed mercenary pack out of the Canadian Rockies. The contract was straightforward: $5 million in bearer bonds to quietly breach the estate, butcher the Omega, and snap the child's neck. The night of the strike was masked by a torrential, howling Pacific Northwest storm. Thunder rattled the reinforced glass of the estate, perfectly drowning out the precise, silent disabling of the perimeter alarms. Anna, conditioned by 4 years of constant, paranoid vigilance, was awake. She sat in a velvet armchair staring blindly out at the rain when the rancid, coppery scent of wet rot and blood slipped beneath the heavy oak door of her suite. Rogs. Adrenaline flooded her veins like ice water. Anna lunged for the bed, scooping a sleeping Leo into her arms. "Leo, wake up! Do not make a sound," she commanded in a fierce, breathless whisper. Before she could reach the emergency panic button on the wall, the heavy door splintered inward with a deafening crash. 3 massive, heavily scarred rogue wolves poured into the suite, their sickly yellow eyes locking instantly onto the child in Anna's arms. Anna didn't scream. An Omega was meant to cower, meant to submit, but a mother cornered was an entirely different beast. As the lead wolf lunged, snapping its massive, slavering jaws toward Leo, Anna pivoted. She drew her blade and drove the silver-laced dagger straight upward, burying it deep into the soft tissue under the wolf's jaw. The beast choked on its own blood, thrashing violently before collapsing into a dead heap on the Persian rug. The second wolf snarled, swiping a massive paw. Thick claws tore through Anna's shoulder, shredding muscle and fabric. She screamed in agony, dropping the blade, but instinctively twisted her body to take the brunt of the impact. She shielded Leo beneath her as she hit the floor, curling tightly around her son, squeezing her eyes shut as she waited for the fatal bite to tear her throat out. Instead, the air pressure in the room violently dropped. A roar that sounded like shifting tectonic plates shook the walls. Tobias burst into the suite. He didn't even bother shifting into his wolf form. The sheer, unadulterated power of his alpha rage was enough. He seized the second rogue by the throat, his muscles bulging as he lifted the massive beast off the ground. With a sickening, wet crunch, Tobias crushed the wolf's windpipe with his bare hands, tossing the carcass aside like a rag doll. The third rogue turned to flee, but Harrison and a dozen heavily armed enforcers flooded the corridor, cutting the fleeing mercenary down in a hail of silver-laced gunfire. Tobias stood breathing heavily, his hands dripping with rogue blood. He dropped to his knees beside Anna. She was bleeding profusely, her face deathly pale, but her arms remained in a death grip around Leo. "Anna," Tobias choked out, his hands hovering over her, terrified to touch her, terrified he would break her further. "Are you—" "Don't touch me," she hissed, her eyes wild. They bypassed the security. They walked right past the guards. They knew exactly where we were. She looked up, her gaze piercing him. "Who gave them the override codes, Tobias? Who wants my son dead?" The tactical reality slammed into Tobias with the force of a freight train. The bemitter alarms were military grade. Only 3 people possessed the codes: Tobias, Harrison, and the Luna. The air in the room grew suffocatingly dense. "Harrison," Tobias commanded, his voice suddenly dead and hollow. "Secure this wing. Call Dr. Pendleton." Tobias stalked through the mansion, leaving bloody footprints on the marble floors. He kicked open the double doors to the master suite. Vivienne was frantically stuffing passports and jewelry into a designer duffel bag. She froze as he entered, the color draining from her face when she saw the gore coating his hands. Tobias didn't shout. He walked forward in eerie silence, wrapped his massive, blood-stained hand around her throat, and lifted her off the ground. "You brought assassins into my home," he rasped quietly, his silver eyes glowing with lethal intent. "The alliance with the Crimson Claw is void. Your title is stripped." He threw her to the floor at the feet of his enforcers who had followed him. "Take her to the holding cells in the lower levels. Tell her father she faces the penalty for high treason. If he objects, I will burn his territory to ash." When Tobias returned to the East Wing, Dr. Pendleton was already stitching Anna's shoulder. Leo sat on the bed, glaring warily at his father, while clutching his mother's uninjured hand. "Arthur, give us a moment," Tobias requested quietly. The doctor nodded, packing his bag and leaving them alone. Tobias stood at the foot of the bed. He looked at Anna, broken, bleeding, yet infinitely stronger than he had ever been. He had thrown her into the snow, and she had survived to save his legacy. Slowly, deliberately, the ruthless Alpha King sank to his knees on the ruined carpet. He bowed his head, baring his neck to her in the ultimate, universally recognized gesture of total and absolute submission. "I was a coward," Tobias whispered, a single tear cutting a clean track through the blood on his cheek. "I was terrified that needing you would make me weak. But without you, I have been rotting from the inside out. I am begging you to let me be his father. Let me protect you. I will dismantle this entire empire and hand it to you if you just stay." Anna looked down at the broken king at her feet. The dormant, severed bond fluttered to life in her chest, a warm ember catching fire. She looked at Leo, whose defensive glare was finally softening as he watched the giant man kneel before his mother. "You won't hand me your empire," Anna said, her voice unyielding and absolute. "You will share it with me. There will be no more secrets, no more decisions made without me. If you ever try to command me again, Tobias, I will leave, and you will never find us." Tobias looked up, his silver eyes shining with fierce, desperate gratitude. "You have my word, my life, my soul." Tobias Sebastian learned that true power wasn't forged in isolation, but anchored in the very bonds he once feared. It took the near loss of his heir, and the fierce, unyielding strength of a shattered Omega to break the king's pride. In the end, the ruthless Alpha didn't conquer his fated mate. He submitted to her, finding his true reign in the family he almost threw away.
Hi, my name is King's Obsession Concord, the owner and manager of King's Obsession Concord. After watching the video, no one could tame the ruthless Alpha King, until the broken Omega he cast out returned with his Heir. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me most was the mix of regret, redemption, and second chances. The story explores what can happen when pride and painful decisions come back years later, forcing people to face the consequences of their choices. Seeing a once broken Omega return stronger than before adds an emotional layer that makes the journey feel less about revenge and more about growth, healing, and finding strength after hardship. Do you think the Alpha King deserved a second chance after casting her out? And if you were in the Omega's position, would you find it possible to forgive someone who had hurt you so deeply? Stories like this remind me that our choices often have lasting effects, and that true growth begins when we're willing to acknowledge our mistakes and learn from them. If this story stayed with you after watching, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy Alpha King stories filled with emotion, redemption, and powerful reunions, feel free to like and subscribe for more whenever you'd like.